Abraham Lincoln's life traces a path from frontier poverty and self-education to the moral and political leadership of the United States during its greatest crisis. Born in a Kentucky log cabin and largely self-taught, he became a successful lawyer, a powerful writer and speaker, a husband and father marked by deep personal losses, and the president who preserved the Union and destroyed slavery. His story is one of hard work, moral growth, and an evolving sense of responsibility that culminated in his wartime leadership and his most enduring words. Early life on the frontier. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin on the Sinking Spring Farm in Hardin County, Kentucky, now LaRue County. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, were poor farmers of modest background. They had 3 children, Sarah, Abraham, and a younger son, Thomas, who died in infancy. Land title disputes and economic difficulties forced the family to move several times within Kentucky, from Sinking Spring to Knob Creek, before they left the state in 1816. When Abraham was 7, the Lincolns moved to southern Indiana, settling in what he later called an unbroken forest near Little Pigeon Creek, where his father cleared land and built a cabin. Life was hard and precarious. The family relied on subsistence farming, and Abraham was expected to work from an early age, limiting his schooling to a few months at scattered blab schools. Lincoln later estimated that his formal education totaled less than 1 year, but he read voraciously when he could, borrowing books and teaching himself from the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, and works of history and law. Tragedy marked his youth. In 1818, his mother Nancy died of milk sickness, a poisoning from cows grazing on white snake root, leaving 9-year-old Abraham bereft. His father remarried in 1819, bringing Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow with 3 children, into the household. Lincoln formed a close, affectionate bond with his stepmother and later credited her with encouraging his love of reading. In 1828, his sister Sarah died in childbirth, another blow that deepened his early experiences of loss. In 1830, the family moved again, this time to Illinois, where Lincoln helped his father settle near Decatur before striking out on his own. As a young man, he worked as a rail splitter, flatboatman on the Mississippi River, store clerk, and surveyor, gaining the first-hand knowledge of frontier labor and commerce that would later inform his politics. These early years forged his character, self-reliant, reflective, and attuned to the struggles of ordinary people. Self-taught lawyer and writer, Lincoln's path into the law and politics began in New Salem, Illinois, where he moved in the early 1830s and quickly became known for his honesty, storytelling, and ability to resolve disputes. After serving as a captain in the local militia during the Black Hawk War and losing his first election for the Illinois legislature in 1832, he persisted and won a seat in 1834 as a member of the Whig Party. Without formal legal schooling, Lincoln read law on his own while serving in the legislature, studying Blackstone and other legal texts by candlelight. He obtained a law license in 1836 and moved to Springfield in 1837, joining a law firm and developing a busy practice that covered the 8th Judicial Circuit. Riding the circuit from town to town, he handled cases ranging from debt and land disputes to criminal trials, earning a reputation for clear reasoning, fair dealing, and compelling courtroom speeches. Lincoln's writing and speaking style, honed as a lawyer, would become one of his greatest assets. Scholars of legal rhetoric note that he carefully studied great speeches and literature, aimed for clarity and logical structure, and avoided needless ornamentation, believing arguments should be expressed in a way that all could understand. In his Notes for a Law lecture, he advised young lawyers to discourage litigation and emphasized honesty and plain speaking over showy oratory. revealing both his ethical ideals and his approach to persuasion. Politically, Lincoln served 4 terms in the Illinois legislature, 1834-1842, and 1 term in the U.S. House of Representatives, 1847-1849, where he opposed the Mexican-American War as unjustly begun. After his congressional term, he returned to law for several years, but the expansion of slavery into the Western territories, especially the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, drew him back into politics as a vocal critic of what he saw as a threat to the nation's founding principles. Lincoln's personal life was as complex as his public one. In Springfield, he met Mary Todd, a well-educated woman from a prominent Kentucky slaveholding family. They became engaged in 1840, briefly broke off the engagement, and finally married on November 4th, 1842. The couple had 4 sons: Robert, born 1843, Edward Eddy, 1846, William Willie, 1850, and Thomas Tad, 1853. Only Robert survived into adulthood. Eddie died in 1850, Willie in 1862 while Lincoln was president, and Tad in 1871, leaving Mary to outlive 3 of her children. Accounts of the Lincolns' marriage describe it as affectionate but often turbulent. Mary, who suffered from mood swings and later, likely, mental illness, could be verbally and sometimes physically abusive toward her husband. Lincoln, introspective and prone to bouts of depression, sometimes withdrew emotionally, yet he was a devoted father, known for playing with his sons in the Springfield home and later in the White House, tolerating their noise and antics even in the midst of official business. The death of Willie in 1862, probably from typhoid, was especially devastating. The family sought refuge at the Soldiers' Home, a rural retreat north of Washington where Lincoln could both grieve and work on wartime decisions in relative privacy. Historians note that his months there, commuting to the White House during the day, became a setting where his public and private lives blurred as he balanced family sorrow with the burdens of command and drafted key documents such as the Emancipation Proclamation.
Lincoln's national profile rose sharply in the 1850s. Outraged by Senator Stephen A. Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed territories to decide on slavery by popular sovereignty, Lincoln re-entered politics, helping to form the new Republican Party in Illinois. In 1858, he challenged Douglas for the U.S. Senate, and although he ultimately lost the election, the series of 7 Lincoln-Douglas debates across Illinois made him nationally famous. In these debates, Lincoln argued that slavery was morally wrong and incompatible with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, even if he proposed limiting rather than immediately abolishing it where it already existed. He warned that a nation half slave and half free could not endure, predicting that the Union would eventually become all one thing or all the other, a theme he had already advanced in his famous House Divided speech earlier in 1858. The debates showcased his ability to present complex constitutional and economic issues in logical, accessible language, and the published transcripts helped make him an appealing presidential candidate for Republicans seeking a moderate but firm anti-slavery voice.
Lincoln took office in March 1861, facing secession and the imminent threat of war. By then, 7 southern states had formed the Confederate States of America. The attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861 led him to call for volunteers, prompting 4 more states to join the Confederacy and initiating the Civil War. As President and Commander-in-Chief, Lincoln had to manage military strategy, a fractious cabinet, public opinion in the North, and relations with border slave states that remained in the Union.
In his first inaugural address, Lincoln emphasized that he had no intention to interfere with slavery where it existed, but insisted that secession was legally void and that his duty was to preserve the Union. As the war unfolded, his views evolved. Initially focused primarily on Union, he came to see emancipation as both a moral imperative and a military necessity, undermining the Confederacy's labor system and redefining the war's purpose.
On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in states in rebellion to be free and inviting black men to serve in the Union Army. Though limited in immediate reach, it did not apply to loyal border states or Confederate areas already under Union control. It marked a decisive shift. The Union war effort now explicitly aimed at ending slavery in the seceded states as well as restoring national unity. It also laid the groundwork for the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery throughout the United States and was passed by Congress in January 1865.
Lincoln's writing during the war reached new heights of concision and depth. The Gettysburg Address, delivered on November 19, 1863, at the dedication of a national cemetery on the site of a major battle, compressed the meaning of the war into about 270 words, invoking a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. His second inaugural address in March 1865, with its themes of shared guilt and malice toward none, with charity for all, offered a profound reflection on slavery, war, and reconciliation just weeks before his death. These speeches show the culmination of his lifelong effort to marry precise logic with moral seriousness in simple, rhythmic English.
A family man in wartime. Even in wartime, Lincoln's identity as a husband and father remained central, though often constrained by duty. The White House became both a seat of government and a family home. Visitors sometimes saw Tad or Willie playing in the hallways or interrupting meetings, and Lincoln rarely insisted on formal distance with his sons. The deaths of Eddie before the presidency and Willie in 1862 deepened the melancholy that friends and biographers have described as part of his personality. Mary, Todd. Lincoln's grief further strained the marriage, yet the couple remained together and shared a strong bond of loss. The soldiers' home on the outskirts of Washington provided a partial refuge. There Lincoln could ride or drive out of the city, spend nights in a modest cottage with his family, and think through policy free from some pressures of the White House, even as he commuted daily and met with advisors and visitors. Historians have suggested that this setting allowed him to reflect on emancipation and post-war policy in a quieter environment, intertwining his roles as father, husband, and wartime leader. On April 14, 1865, just days after Confederate General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, where he was shot by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. He died the next morning, April 15th, at the age of 56, becoming the first U.S. president to be assassinated. His death shocked the nation and turned him almost immediately into a martyr for Union and emancipation. Assessing Lincoln's life involves balancing his personal imperfections and political compromises against the vast consequences of his leadership. He began as a self-educated frontier lawyer and politician, cautious and moderate on slavery, yet he became the president who steered the Union through civil war, broadened the meaning of the American experiment to include the destruction of slavery, and articulated that shift in prose and speeches that still resonate. As a family man, he experienced deep domestic pain, loss of children, a difficult marriage, and bouts of depression, but found solace in his affection for his sons and the companionship of a stepmother he adored. His writing, whether in courtroom arguments, political debates, or presidential addresses, shows how the craft of clear, disciplined language can shape public life. Lincoln's ability to explain complex issues in plain terms and to frame the Civil War as a test of equality and democratic government helped redefine American identity. In this sense, his life is a story not only of political power, but of the power of words. A man of limited schooling who, through reading, reflection, and experience, became one of the English language's most influential political writers and a central figure in the ongoing effort to align the United States more closely with its founding ideals.